And then you also have the notion of a connecting disposition for the passionate explorer, which is a natural orientation to connect to others when confronted with challenges and opportunities that you're wrestling with. Who else can I find that will help me to address this challenge, that shares my passion or at least has some experience or expertise that might be helpful to me in terms of addressing that challenge? And we found through some of our research that passionate people, passionate workers in particular, tend to be twice as connected as workers who are not passionate about their jobs. Narratives also invite us to take initiative. They encourage leadership, not followership. And here I'm talking particularly about opportunity-based narratives. All about what can you do to help? What's going to be your role? It's up to you. Take initiative. Don't wait for instructions, orders, plans. Take initiative. And because they're open-ended, they stimulate our imagination. The future is yet to be determined. We don't know all the details. It's inviting us to imagine new possibilities. For those of us who believe imagination is increasingly critical to success, that's a powerful attribute. So in a business context, there's significant competitive advantage if you can harness the power of narrative. You get extraordinary leverage because now you're not just motivating the people in your own organization, you're motivating a much larger arena to support initiatives and to take initiative in those areas. And they motivate people to continually drive beyond their current limits. Rather than feeling stress, they feel excitement because there's such an opportunity out there and they're part of that. They're part of going to make that happen. Very powerful. And then finally, when I talk about the power of narrative, I think that narrative can be very powerful at any of those three levels: individual, institutional, and social. But I'd like to make the case that the power of narrative amplifies dramatically if you can get alignment between individual, institutional, and social narratives. Because then you're building on each other as opposed to just taking a slice and trying to get impact from that slice. Okay, so that's at least some of my beliefs in terms of the power of narrative. I guess the question is, what can we do about narrative? If they're so powerful, what do we do? And this is where I'm particularly hazy at this point, so I invite lots of contribution on this front. You know, I'll start by saying that I think the first thing we all ought to do is make our existing narratives explicit. You know, many of us will say, well, I don't have a narrative. I've never even thought about it in those terms. What's a narrative? I guarantee we all have narratives at a personal level, at an institutional level, and at a social level. They are manifested through action. If they're not explicit, they are implicit, deeply embedded in the actions we've taken, the decisions we've made, the choices we've made. And your first opportunity is to make that narrative explicit. What is that narrative underlying all those actions that have been taken? And explore this at multiple levels. Start with your own self. What's my narrative? Whatever institution you're affiliated with, what's the institutional narrative of the group I'm associated with? And then more broadly, at various levels of society, what are the narratives there? And then, once you have that narrative framed, ask yourself whether these narratives are helping you to turn pressure into excitement and opportunity, or are they reinforcing stress and limiting the scope of your potential impact? Is this a worthwhile narrative, or isn't it? Is it helping you to achieve, and your institution and society to achieve what it can and should achieve? And then finally, what are some alternative narratives that might amplify potential and possibility? Now, the really hard question is, how do we evolve narratives? Let's say we've gone through this exercise and we found that we've got a set of narratives that when we look at them, we say, gee, I'm not really sure that's the kind of narrative I want to be associated with. Well, how do you create or move to a new narrative? And this is, I think, the most challenging aspect of this. There are some things that I do know, at least I think I know, subject to challenge. And one thing is that narratives can't be handed over to a PR firm or just written up. You can't sit down and write a narrative. In fact, when I look at all the powerful narratives throughout history, none of them had a single author that just sat down and wrote a narrative. They were a collective, collaborative effort that emerged over time by multiple authors and actors. They emerge and evolve out of cumulative action, not words, not writing things down, but actions that accumulate over time, not one or two actions that kind of illustrate the narrative. It's cumulative, day in, day out. And I go back to the example of Apple and the Think Different narrative. I mean, yes, somebody finally came up with that slogan, Think Different. But that was just a slogan. It wasn't the narrative. The narrative emerged from the first day that Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs met each other. Talk about two people who thought different and acted different from day one. And through every action they took, demonstrated difference. And then invited and motivated a whole bunch of other people outside of Apple to think differently. That's what created the narrative. So the difficult part is this isn't easy. You can't just write it. It comes through action and cumulative action over time. So, again, I'm not going to have a lot of silver bullets here, but I do think it's important to understand that these narratives emerge out of and are shaped by and sustained by daily practice. So being reflective about the daily practice that we have, and to what extent it's either supporting or undermining narratives, I think is important. You have to live it, you have to embody it. It's not just, again, those PR actions that get coverage or photo opportunities that build the narrative. No. It's those actions when the photographers aren't there. When you're in your privacy of your day-to-day life, day-to-day work environment. What are the actions there? I think part of it has to do with zooming in and zooming out. I think this is something that I've seen with all the successful entrepreneurs I know, which is the ability to think and act on two different horizons simultaneously. One is a very long-term horizon, and have some kind of view and ability to articulate that long-term, compelling, and energizing opportunity. And to be clear about how that opportunity is an opportunity for many people, not just you, not just for your company, but for a lot of people. What's that opportunity? What is it? And then identifying near-term actions that can help make material movement towards that opportunity and demonstrate the power of the opportunity. Part of it's inspiring others to take initiative, opening up the invitation, not just to join, but to take initiative, to define our own space around this opportunity. And celebrating the contributions and initiative of others. I think one of the powerful things in emerging narratives is the ability to find and curate stories of others who are maybe not consciously participating in these narratives, but which had impact consistent with and complementary to the narrative. Find those, celebrate them, share them. but always focus on the next wave of opportunity. Whatever the accomplishment, whatever the achievement, it's only one step along the path. There's so much more to be achieved. And I think in the context of South by Southwest, one of the things that really excites me is the fact that technology is now available that can help amplify narratives over time. Technology platforms that can help us to amplify reach and richness, allow us to spread, to actually take action and spread word about action in ways that were just not feasible in the past, that took much longer and much more effort to accomplish. And in this context, I'll also just highlight the importance of, from my experience, of transmedia platforms. Now, I think many of us at South by Southwest tend to celebrate transmedia as some very new phenomenon. Wow, isn't this amazing what we can do now with technology? Well, I go back and draw some inspiration from the great narratives of the past, and I would say that one thing that defines many, if not all of them, is that their penetration of society ultimately depended on the ability to transcend the confines of any individual medium. And I'll give as my case example one of the narratives that I've talked about already, Christianity. Yeah, Christians have their Bible as a core text, and it's a central aspect of the narrative. But if that's all they had, wow, what a weak and paltry narrative that would have been. They quickly moved into sermons, music, theater, video, to evangelize that message in every medium possible. They were the pioneers of transmedia. It wasn't until South by Southwest came that we had transmedia. If you look at the most successful evangelical preachers today, you'll discover some of the most sophisticated transmedia platforms available. They are harnessing the power of all media. And I think one of the really interesting aspects, and I owe this to Malcolm Gladwell, an interesting article he wrote in New Yorker many years ago, where he looked at the evangelical movement. He said one of the interesting things that powers the evangelical movement and the narrative behind the movement is that while they have these mega churches where the hundreds of thousands of people come to hear the sermon on Sunday, the real action is in meetings that occur outside the church 2 or 3 times a week with groups of maybe 6 people who form deep trust-based relationships with each other, and their whole focus is on action. It's not about studying the Word, it's about what can we do to have impact through the Word. And that's what's driving that movement. The transmedia and local initiative and action is critical. So I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm excited by the opportunity if we can get it right. I have this instinct, again, that narratives are hugely powerful. They're largely ignored. There's not a lot of attention that's been paid to them, at least in the sense that I'm talking about them. And I think they ultimately represent an extraordinarily powerful pull mechanism. As Eric mentioned in his introduction, I wrote a book called The Power of Pull. I think narratives are extremely powerful as a pull mechanism that draw out people and resources when needed and where needed, despite all the uncertainty that exists in the world. It can shape the world around us in ways that virtually nothing else can. And I think there are questions. Who's going to craft these broader social narratives? Again, I don't think it's any individual that can sit down and do this, certainly not through writing. It's up to all of us. Who even understands the need and power of a new set of social narratives? I think there's an underlying sense of malaise, certainly in the U.S. civic public that the narratives we have today don't serve us well. But who's going to change that, and how? And what would the new social narrative look like? I think at the end of the day, one of the things that really excites me about this is the opportunity to build a movement. Every powerful movement that I've ever seen in history that has had an impact on our world has been shaped and driven by a compelling and energizing narrative. So if you're serious about creating a movement and having impact through a movement, core question, what's the narrative that's going to drive that movement? If we get this right, I think that small moves, smartly made, can set really big things in motion. So thank you very much for your attention. I think we have some time for some questions. And appreciate any input, feedback. I'm active on social media at J. Hagel for Twitter, and invite continuing conversation beyond whatever Q&A we have here today.